Hey, kia ora everybody. I'm over Zoom, so we'll have good audio this time. We're talking to Rachel Kelly. She's in Hamilton. I first met Rachel when 2016, I think. We were starting up Seed, and Rachel was involved with, it was called South, which I don't know what the acronym means. But anyway, that was on leadership as well, and so we thought we'd connect and see what we could work with. But Rachel, I always start off with, what have you been doing this weekend?
Oh, this weekend,
Yeah.
just trying to set goals, figure out my plan for over the Christmas and New Year break, and yeah, enjoying a bit of the sunshine. I'm over the rain and really eager to work a little bit on my tan and drinking mojitos where I can.
Lovely. So you were in San Fran for a while, is that right?
Yeah, I was in San Fran for about a week, and then I was in Denver for another week. So yeah, two round trips to the US that turned out to be very spontaneous. That the board had asked me to attend with the CEO, so I just kind of had to make it work. But I was able to get a bunch of stuff from the US that I've been having on my list since I moved back to New Zealand. So I was pretty happy about that actually.
Me being into hunting, looking at all the stuff that's in the US and then thinking, well, the postage and then it'll probably get stopped and that's the GST, and I'm like, oh, damn it. Yeah, so is it a bit like that with some of your wish list? Like, just not worth it to try and get it in?
I know you're going to laugh because one of the top things on my wish list was a block of Hinkel knives. So I love to cook and bake, which is almost a direct opposite to the hustle I do at work. And I wanted to make sure that with my new move and my circumstances that I ended up getting my Hinkel knives. And I knew I couldn't really ship knives from the US very easily because the blocks are heavy.
Yeah.
Right? And so I did everything I could to make sure I got them ordered from Costco because you can't afford them here. They're just too expensive. Shipped to my second hotel because I knew they wouldn't ship to the first. And then there was a bit of a delay in shipping. I digress. It was a bit of a drama, but that first trip to San Fran, I thought if I can get these knives through customs and all that kind of stuff, that was a win. Small thing, but it was a win, and I have them sitting on my counter right now, and I look at them and think, the work I did to earn you.
I love that. And having moved house twice in the last year and buying Kmart knives, I can definitely appreciate what you're talking about with the sharp knife. Mum got Alex a nice knife for her birthday, and it's been an absolute dream.
You know what? My biggest pet peeve, I got a couple of them, but one of them is when I go to my friends and family, because I often cook them dinner. So I'll rock up to my friend's house, I'll come with like a HelloFresh for 4 people, and I'll say, I'll cook for you, just leave it away. And the number of times I try their knives and I'm trying to cut the tomato and it bends it. Like it bends the tomato. I'm like, it's supposed to cut. How do you tolerate this? Anyway, that's just one of my many little things that I enjoy as a sharp knife.
Yeah, well, that's exactly on the old infomercials how they'd advertise a sharp knife is. Look, it dies through the tomato.
It's so true. So true. Yeah.
On that HelloFresh, we got a friend of Alex's gave us a voucher and we had 4 meals. Holy cow, they go well. Like, I've tried Nadia Lim's one before, food bag, and it was all right. But man, I was impressed with HelloFresh. How long have you been using it for? Or you just sometimes use it, or what?
Well, I've been a recent convert actually. So I used to be a my food bag, and then I went into the bargain box because my kids would not eat my food bag, and even the family bargain box, my kids were way too picky. And like you, I had my friend gift me a week of HelloFresh, and I was just delighted. And with the fresh food, the flavors, the variety. And I've actually just considered that the kids won't still eat it, so that's not a win. But I've basically just made the commitment that, particularly for vegetarian options, because I'm trying to have more non-meat alternatives, that for me to foray into the non-meat meals, I wanted to be able to get sort of experts to teach me how and to just make it easy. So I actually have again, for my circumstance, I have meals for three meals a week, and I get that delivered every fortnight. And then that really feeds me. And, if I have friends over or have fun, and then the kids will try some of the new stuff, or I'll just make them what I know they'll eat, which is pizza or meatballs or, gosh, it's going to sound terrible, but chicken nibbles with French fries from the freezer, which is a staple in worst case scenario, porridge on those.
Well, Billy's 22 months, which is not quite old enough to be like, I don't want that. But yeah, some days, even at that age, you're like, can you just eat something?
I sometimes feel like they grow from fresh air. How little they eat. My kids are currently growing about 1 centimetre a month. I mean, they have pretty good appetites, and we've figured out how to hustle with their dinners. But sometimes I just don't know how they grow. It's just oxygen and sunshine.
Yeah. If you're, training hard and go more of the vegetarian route, you should check out these guys, New Zealand company. Yeah, they do, vegan friendly even, if you're that way inclined. Proteins and yummy flavors and stuff.
Is it pea-based protein? What is the base?
Yeah, so I'm just reading it. Chia, golden pea, cacao, maca root, broccoli sprouts, kola nut, hemp, dandelion root, barley grass, wheatgrass, alfalfa leaf, spirulina. It's all in there. There's a lot in there. Matcha, turmeric, parsley leaf. Actually, this one I should not drink at night time. The fire protein, spiced chocolate.
What have you got? Caffeine.
Oh, the matcha. Yeah.
Oh yeah. You're gonna have to send me the link at the end of this so I can check it out.
Well, on here it says New Zealand superfoods, but I can't remember. I'm going to be rude and go on my phone. I need to
do an order of some of my faves, which are from the brand Pika. They're an Australian company, and they have a lot of the pea-based proteins, not GMO, which that's a whole other story there, generally. And just ran out of some of my faves, which was what was it? Oh, their Boost, which has a whole bunch of like really good super nutrients, and a couple like camu powder, I think. I make the most wicked salted caramel smoothie. It is just to die for.
Yeah.
These
guys are Eternal Delights on Instagram, and they are out of Tauranga. So yeah, and they have some mushroom elixirs as well. I don't know if they're growing those in New Zealand or not, but yeah, that's when I was in the bush, I was trying to see if there's any New Zealand reishi. I don't know if it grows out there, and that'd be awesome to stumble across some reishi on a tree.
It's one of those things where you'd see it and you'd think, no.
Yeah.
I stumble across that. And then probably the wrong mushroom, and then you're microdosing before you know it.
Yeah, or it could be some lions, man. That'd be wicked to see falling down off a tree. But yeah, I saw some of that. There's this like black one that's out in the bush. It's like a oyster mushroom type thing. And I noticed that it only grows on the north side of the tree. So I guess that's like one of those navigation bushcraft things. Is if you can't figure out where north is, find a dead tree and see where those fungus are. I just had that. I'm probably wrong.
I'll quote you on it. And when I'm doing, Bear Grylls, and I lose my way, I'll say, that Ryan dude has no idea how to navigate using mushrooms.
Well, if you're doing Bear Grylls, you've got the camera crew there and the hotel's handy and the helicopter, so you'll be all right anyway. So, Rachel, you said, why do you want to get me on your podcast if your target's, sort of those males at my age of life going, how the hell do I navigate this thing? And I said, well, the podcast is a little bit selfish for me. I just want to talk to people that I'm interested in. And AI and automation, I work in a service industry of optometry, and the place I was working for in Australia was telling me about this software that can pick up diabetic retinopathy in a photo, and the same for macular degeneration. We use a tool at work called the ocular coherence tomographer. So it basically gives the contour and cross-section of the retina, and you can look at that, and it's already got a couple of identifiers of different things. how do you see the world? Oh, this is a big question for you because you've got it. You've got the bird's eye view. How do you see automation in New Zealand? Like kiwi fruit as well. They got those robots going through, picking things up.
Wow.
Yeah. What do you see the automation sphere of New Zealand? Because there's lots of things that take a lot of labour.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the space of autonomous technology applications is such an interesting space for augmented, tools or
Mm.
augmentation tools where, humans, I don't know, we've got our strengths and our weaknesses and many flaws which feed into either one of those sort of two camps. But we miss things, and particularly if you look at certain industries such as healthcare or law enforcement, things like that, where you're under duress or you don't get a lot of sleep, or you just see so many people, right, and you get quite fatigued and may not see some of these triggers or indicators. This is where autonomy or the ability to utilize AI in image recognition and data identification is actually going to be a really great journey for us. There's always going to be that element of if we rely on it too much, we get lazy or lazier. So there's this interesting tension between where it can do our jobs for us if we're lazy versus help us do our own jobs better, which is augmentation. And I think, humans, again, tend to err on the side of if we can get away with not doing a lot, we'll be lazy. So, yeah, it'll be an interesting journey to see how the AI space actually helps us uncover, I guess, this nice balance between the human element and initiative and diagnosis versus autonomous, automated, transactional kind of technology that just pumps through the numbers.
You say that transactional technology in Havelock, actually, just around the corner from me, there's I think Finger Mark. I think that's what they call it. Yeah. Who have shifted from Auckland to Havelock, and there's another tech company in Napier that are doing a complete property management software that's integrating Xero. So from like insurance to the inspections to payments to repairs, inventory, everything all on this one platform. And so, Havelock or Hawke's Bay's try to become the Silicon Valley of New Zealand. But yeah, that finger mark, you see it already when if you go into or even the supermarket, you can help yourself and get out of there without dealing with a person. What do you think? Do you think that's worthwhile, having that transactional technology, reducing manpower, taking away the low skill job? Where do you see the kickback of that? And probably what a lot of people are concerned about with automation is that low skill jobs are not going to be there.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, we'd need probably longer than the podcast allocation to talk about this because it's a highly complex topic. It's interesting when we think about highly transactional, low skill type of activities, and that's where some type of automated process can certainly help improve outcomes for people who generally don't want to interact or engage with a human. There's no need for, the type of strengths that humans have to impart into those roles. Case in point, in some of the automotive industry applications or even electronics, where you don't need people to sit there 14-hour days, putting a semiconductor or transistor into, these little devices, and then it's just this sort of weird conveyor belt line, which is really quite honestly a waste of potential. So my view, which is only my view, and I'm allowed my view just like you're allowed your view, is that the more that we can try to automate the tasks that, to be frank, we shouldn't do, we don't need to do, there's no value really in a life imparted doing something like that, is a good thing. And if that means that people are given the opportunity to have jobs, different kinds of jobs that actually unlocks the potential that human has, I think all in all is probably a good outcome. Now, you've got other issues and dynamics that come from that, where perhaps some people, their highest potential, based on just the genetic lottery or the way that their brain works, perhaps maybe they like those routine tasks, maybe that actually gives them joy, and they're really good at that. And then, if that's the case, seek out the type of roles in which that's required, with the caveat that you can still be human and be you, and actually find joy in those types of roles. So you ask a really big question. It's a complex, dynamic of, capitalism versus human psychology versus, ethics. And overall, though, I'd like to think that it will improve the quality of life of everybody, and equally give people the opportunity to actually reach the potential that they're capable of achieving.
So you're at plenty of these conferences, and that's what's awesome about your stories on Instagram and Facebook, is that we get a little peek into the discussion. How broad is the spectrum of discussion at the likes of a New Zealand AI conference?
Yeah, I mean, the future of work always comes up, right? Future of work and what that means for New Zealanders, the digital divide, and, how do you maintain digital equity and equality and equal opportunity? That always comes up. Responsible technology, thankfully, is coming up more frequently. I'm in the space of digital ethics and trust, and I'm glad to see that becoming more of a key topic that is discussed at length. And we don't know a lot of the answers. I mean, to be frank, we can't even figure out kindness, like basic human kindness. So the irony of all of this and these sort of magnanimous conversations that we're having is, I go to these digital transformation and innovation talks, or these conferences, or talk about innovation in my talks, or write about all these transformative kind of opportunities with technology. And all I need to do is turn on the TV and look at what's going on in Hong Kong, right? Where we can't even get basic kindness right. And as humans that are trying to craft an artificial intelligence, and the only thing we do by default is emulate who we are, there is some concern around how do we mitigate the very nature of human in an intelligence we are birthing with ones and zeros. And I got to admit, trying to capture the full gambit of positive attributes of humans and ones and zeros is next to impossible. Like, the more you try to create discrete if-then statements, if this happens, then do this, the more you realize the gray area is just too vast. And I often talk about, in technology, you've got ones and zeros, but there are the notes between the ones and zeros. It's like music, where you can have these notes, but the cadence and the beauty and the flawed strengths are actually in between the notes. And until we figure out how to do that, I honestly don't know where AI is going to end up. Again, considering we can't even master our own nature of being human.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Immediately when you said that, I thought that if we're creating it, then it's going to be a reflection of us. And something that I haven't watched, but being a keen Joe Rogan fan, that show Black Mirror sounds exactly like the story of we're creating something, and then it ends up showing back our stuff ups and our flaws, which it's exactly what you say there. If we can't have kindness, how do we program kindness, and how do we interpret kindness, and then, like you say, put it into a code, and that's probably where Elon Musk is sort of saying that we're the sex organs of technology, and so if we're the ones that are breeding this, what is it going to look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I'd love to see more of, and one of my missions for next year and this year actually, has been, how do we get these types of conversations around the dining room table? Because until we start having these conversations with 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds, between them and their parents and the kind of group in between, how can we possibly acknowledge the nature of being human, and then the responsibility we have to birth something that is non-human? And what does that look like, and what are the implications, and how do we craft this very mindfully rather than just consume and act by default with some of our very basic, highly evolved but somewhat unevolved tendencies for this day and age.
You bring up a good point there, and it wasn't really highlighted to me until Labour weekend. I was up in Tauranga with my good friend from university and his parents, and we had a couple of glasses of red wine and stuff like that, but we started going into some deep and broad and sort of thought experiment conversations, and one of those was about cannabis reform from next year, and then it was we were going into like at festivals where they're introducing the drug testing for the drug, so to make it safe, and we're talking about my mate and I are both university graduates and working in professional roles, and then that's at the same time that pull into sort of entrepreneurship or adventure, and like his parents, his dad again was an engineer and now is in finance, and it's just like all these broad things, and it speaks to maybe, like you say, that the courage and the awareness to actually start having those conversations around the dinner table instead of just talking about the weather or how was your day at work, or you go to a party these days, how's work been, and most often you get the immediate response of busy, and you're like, oh great.
Yes.
So my immediate response was that I hope it was productive, and that's why I like to say, what did you do on the weekend, instead of how's work been, because the weekend we often chase our passions. So that's a good point about the conversation around the dinner table, and then hopefully the staff room and stuff like that. Do you feel a little bit bubbly, and then when you go out to your friends and things, it's like you end up with those weather and weekday conversations?
Actually, no. I've been nicely surprised with the depth of conversations that come up when you just start asking the question. And what has been fascinating is there's usually two. So a lot of my speaking engagements, whether it be private or public, I often bring up one of two very interesting thought experiments around ethics, right? What's right and wrong. And more often than not, that will prompt an extended conversation within their network, which really does help to bring into light the question between what is right and wrong. How do we define those rules, and should there be rules? Is it okay that we all have different opinion, and equally understand that each other is coming to the table, literally and figuratively, with a different ethical construct around, the sanctity of body, the degree of fairness versus sort of, injustice, or, things like how would you have the right to do what you want if you're not harming anybody, regardless of what it might mean in escalation situations. So again, I talk about the chicken and the dog thought experiments, which may or may not be appropriate for this particular forum, but you guys might enjoy the chicken one, which usually goes down really well. But if we've got time, I'll share that with you.
Okay, go for it. I'd love to hear.
Oh.
Yeah. Anything goes here, so don't worry.
Well, okay. So there is a man, and at the end of each week, he goes to the supermarket and buys a frozen chicken. He takes it to his home where he lives alone. He thaws it slightly, has sex with it, puts it in the oven, and then eats it. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah. That is a tough one. That goes to what you were saying about who's it affecting? And how does it sit with your morals? I guess you'd say it's in theory wrong. It's probably classed as bestiality, and the what's the other one when someone is dead?
Is it
necrophilia?
Necrophilia?
Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting part about this is you will have a guttural response to it. Like there will be an emotional response that you simply can't understand. Like the moment that you hear it, it's like, oh, something bubbles inside of you that just happens naturally. And that's your guttural response, which they often call as kind of the elephant in the room. So it's the big thing that kind of forms the basis of where your moral code sits and how this rubs up or does not rub up against certain things that doesn't necessarily have language in your brain, right? It's just, oh, that's wrong. And then there's a thing called post hoc realization or reasoning, where your brain kicks in and says, well, actually, let's run through a couple of these ideas or metrics around, was anybody being harmed? Because the chicken was already dead. Theoretically, he purchased it with his own money, so he should have the right to do what he likes with it if nothing's being hurt. No one else was involved. He was in his own home. Theoretically, nobody had to see it that didn't consent to it. He obviously ate it himself. He didn't force the bird on someone else after he had sex with it. So your brain starts this post hoc reasoning around this guttural feeling. It starts either justifying those emotions or giving you the tension that maybe your emotions aren't entirely right, and maybe there's a better logical kind of way to respond to this. So everybody will have a different degree of response. So some people will have the guttural response and there's no logic, no post hoc reasoning. They'll just say, that's wrong. You shouldn't talk about that. It's disgusting. And they'll have this absolute fierce emotional response. And then you've got the other extreme where you'll have the people who feel it. But then again, they work through the logic and then they frame their verbal, what happens afterwards through that logical lens. And so when you think about things like politics and religion, particularly when you're looking at things like, cults or, quite extremist groups, they're often quite, there's this emotional response that does not have that lens on it. Trump is one of those people that I often think about under those circumstances. But at the end of the day, it's fascinating because it starts that conversation around the dining room table. And while might not be an appropriate one to talk to your kids about it, there is a dog one that is far more age appropriate, which is sort of similarly triggering, but in a way that is a bit more PG than that version.
So on that, and I thought that comes to mind is Sapiens, and it's around like everything is a construct.
Yes.
And so like I was saying there, the sort of definition of those things as bad are those two words, necrophilia and bestiality.
Yeah.
And then you could go back and say we're animals or what, but we're also intelligent animals, and so you should know better. And you just get down this big broad rabbit hole of things like post-hoc analysis of, well, what are we offended by here or what?
Yeah, well, there's interesting because there's law too, right? So law generally mimics the foundations. So there are actually 6 moral foundations, and if you think of them like little pillars that each have a little dial on top, right? So each pillar has its positive version of it at the top dial, and then the bottom dial of that pillar is the sort of the lesser version of it. So you essentially have care is the first moral foundation. Care with the at the very top where you care a lot, and then the toggle down the bottom is harm, right? So that's the first foundation. And when you sit on that dial, obviously is basically where your moral compass sits on that particular foundation. So we have care, which is one of them. Liberty is the other, where oppression is the opposite. You have fairness, which injustice is kind of the opposite of that. You've got loyalty, so it's support of our team or the tribe and how you fit in and how loyal you are. You have authority, so do you have the authority to command that decision or not? And then there's actually a 6th that we talk about, which is liberty. I think I've got them all: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, loyalty. But anyway, but it's interesting because each of them, if you think again, the dial across those 6, 5 is more acceptably thought of as the 5 moral foundations, but there is a 6 which I think should be included per Jonathan Haidt, which is an amazing moral psychologist. But every dial, right? Everybody has a different dial. So if you think of all of the places that dial could be across those 6 variables, you can see how we can be very, very different with how we view the world, and particularly that one around sanctity, which is often around the body, and highly religious people would think the body is, highly important, and they'll have like a really high sanctity level, whereas others might not think it's that, that of an issue. If somebody dies, you respect the body, but you put them in the ground and you don't really think about it, versus kind of the extreme where they keep the bodies around, embalmed, and clothe them and feed them for a really long time. So I digress. I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but it's interesting to reflect upon those dials across the gambit of religion, politics, even in AI, and how they all sit, and how we even design or figure out how to work together nicely without just respecting that everybody's going to have their different dial set.
Yeah, that sanctity is a big one. Like you say, you can keep someone around. That you could have that open casket for a week, or in some cultures, it comes back to the home, and everybody has to be there to see it, and nothing can be done until everybody's been there and said goodbye. Or there's the other end of the spectrum, which ironically does come from religions, dust to dust, but it's like, where do you stand on that? And sort of sidestepping slightly, if we are breeding this artificial intelligence or augmented reality, where do you think we're at? We're starting to plug in, like, our phones are there, they know what we think, they listen to our conversations and pinpoint where we've been and what we've interacted with. And then we're beginning to get all these wearables, and you've just plugged into the Oura Ring, which I think is a fantastic piece of tech. And I'd love one, or a Whoop or something like that, especially at the moment,
add to everything else.
Especially at the moment, because my sleep is shocking. But where do you think we are with plugging it?
There's a couple of things to talk about. There is, firstly, technology is a tool, and a hammer is a tool, right? A hammer has been around for millennia in various forms, and it can be either used to build homes or furniture, and give people joy and creativity, or it could be used to break windows or kill someone, right? So the reality is technology is simply a tool, and a lot of the damage we may or may not see in the future will be how we choose to use that. So there's that element to it first. So it's a tool. It by itself is not dangerous or evil or can do harm without someone inferring that activity using it as a tool. Secondarily, one of the issues around digital trust and privacy and safety comes down to adequately educating the users to understand where their data is going and what it's doing. And unfortunately, we have come to the end of the road where a lot of these organizations that, to be frank, only have really come out in the last 5 to 10 years, have had a la carte access because there's been no regulation around, data ownership, right? Do I own the data I generate? Is it like my arm, where it's connected to me and therefore nobody can steal it or misuse it? Or is it like a piece of hair, right, where it's part of me? It's vestigial. It doesn't really harm me if it's on or not. And if I lose it and it sits on the floor, is that still mine, or is that now public forum? And so there's this kind of interesting part around, ownership, and what does my data mean, and how is it used to create value not only for myself, but potentially a third party, in which what we're seeing in the last 5 to 10 years is our data being used for the profit of third parties. And one thing I'm on the mission, one of my missions for next year is, and I've been trying to find lawyers that will help me with this, because a lot of them don't want to touch it with a barge pole. But how does New Zealand become the first country in the world to mandate the requirement for common language bullet points of end user license agreements or terms of use as a part of any type of business in New Zealand, to the point where the common language is something that a 12-year-old could understand? So when you actually hit accept or yes to these license agreements or these user statements and legalities, well, they've got the 72-page barrage of legal jargon. You've got your top layperson's terms, what you're giving up, what rights you're abdicating, and why it matters. So a 12-year-old could read it. And again, the lawyers I've spoken to, obviously it's spotted with, legal concerns around what if we don't articulate it, exactly right, and what does this mean if you're in a, litigious, quite a litigious person, where you didn't fully understand that because it was only in 10 words instead of 40. And so the key point being is, until we fully understand where our data goes and what we're actually giving companies permission to do with it, we simply can't be empowered to control or understand the value, not only to ourselves, but others. And then I think once we do a better job of starting to do that and informing, empowered data subjects, which is what the GDPR calls people as data subjects, until we start understanding the where our data goes and how it's valuable, we can't basically understand how to leverage that personally. So I'd like to think that in the next 5 years, we will have a lot greater transparency over data auditability and accountability. So where does my data go? Where is it stored? What endpoint is it used to create? And how do I revoke that if I feel like a company I said yes to is misusing that data? Equally, how do I monetize it while they're using it and take a percentage bite of their profits because my data is useful in crafting new commercial outlay? So kind of taking a step back, it's okay, understanding what data has been collected, understanding that I'm sharing it and here's the value, and then understanding how I can monetize it to actually craft hopefully better outcomes long term.
In this aspect, the likes of YouTube comes in. I was listening to a playlist just before and was being absolutely rammed with ads, and it's like, well, man, they're making some money on this. These were country songs and they're heavily listened to and things like that. And interestingly enough, I know a country artist who is a keen hunter but does not sing or promote or anything about hunting. And I would imagine that the moment they do that, there's a chance for their YouTube or their Spotify or whatever to be demonetized. It goes back to that perception of right and all those dials, and the likes of YouTube or the likes of Instagram, which is very obviously critiquing that part of society, and then, like you said, the value of it, the data of it, who does it belong to, who makes the money out of it, and do you have to play the game to, if that's your business or that's your livelihood, do you have to play the game of this higher being? And it's a fascinating little world that we've got going on right now.
Yeah, and I mean, if it wasn't complex, it's boring.
Yeah, and that's where, like I say, it's complex because some of the ads you get on there are like, well, obviously it's all paid for because it's where the money comes from. But it's like goes from corporate ads that you might usually have seen on TV to these individuals. One of them's people that starting Amazon businesses, and apparently they've sold it for $1 million, and now they've got an ebook, and you're like, okay, so you're making all this money from your business, but you want to sell me an ebook too? You're like, yeah, come on. But yeah, like how much does it cost them to get that reach, and all these questions that start coming up about when you look at, like you say, observing the tool or just letting it wash over you, and that's probably where it's important to have a conversation about use and addiction to technology and observing what you're digesting. We don't have a TV anymore and haven't for a few years, and you definitely don't miss it. And
you don't.
Yeah, I think that gives you this objection to when you do turn a TV on, and every 20 minutes or so these ads get blasted. You're like, holy cow, this is a triggering or offensive or irking. You get that guttural response all of a sudden.
Yeah. The interesting part is FOMO is real, but when you do make a decision, an empowered decision to turn something off, with a small adjustment period, you don't really notice it. And I've got a 3-strike rule for all content that I try to just follow. And that meant that by principle, the 3-strike rule, I couldn't watch the first episode of Game of Thrones because 3 of the main content pieces I will not support in my life. But I didn't miss out. I mean, people talked about Game of Thrones, but I was just like, you know what? That's just not what I want to support in my life. That type of content, it's not acceptable. And that not only made me feel empowered, it gave people, when people asked, why don't you watch them? Like, it's a 3-strike rule hit. Like, first episode, don't watch it anymore. But equally, I actually feel like I made a difference to, even though it's just one user, one point, that somehow in some small way I've made a difference to driving more responsible content.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Like Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, it's tons of serial content. Actually, on there, I was watching Mad Men, and I got about a couple of seasons in, and I think I was quite invested in the character, and then like going to those morals, things got pear-shaped real bad, and I just couldn't watch it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's ways to navigate the same content more tactfully. And again, just because I've got a 3-strike rule doesn't mean I'm super anal about how, the content I support, because I'm certainly not a saint and I will watch all sorts of things, but it's how they do it, right? It's not necessarily what they do. So, my 3-strike rule is, degradation or injury or death, intentful death and torture of women, children, and animals. So those are the 3. And that does not mean I don't respect men's lives. It's just how often do you see men getting raped on television? It's very rare, right? The point being is it's okay a part of the storyline and character development to infer these types of things. And you can still do that tastefully and tactfully, but to do it as blatantly and unnecessarily as some of these shows do, I just think that's the line. Like, is that really important for content development or, character development? Yes. Okay. How do we do it in a way that isn't necessarily, as obvious or as cruel or unusual or damaging to people who just walk in and see it randomly like kids?
Yeah. And I guess when you speak to Game of Thrones, it was quite sort of normalized and this is how it is type thing. Yeah. No, it's a real tough one with being purposeful of what you watch, and we've talked about it on before. There's a YouTube guy, Elliot Halston, who sort of talks about what are you brainwashing yourself with.
I suppose. What's all choice, right? I mean, I think people underestimate the power of choice and being intentional with that choice and saying what do they want or not want to support in their lives. And it's amazing the number of times I've spoken, to small groups of people, and they say, what do we do with the kids using social media? Or I can't get my kid off Xbox or Fortnite. I'm like, turn it off. Like, you're the parent. So, are you serious? You're the parent and you're making this choice. And people like to abdicate their responsibility of choice. And I actually just want to shake these people. I'm like, your kid's not engaging with you? Be a great parent and turn it off. Like, have a digital-free week or month and do it as well. And be a great role model and talk about how it's, we are consumers, but we actually are trying to live and we need to make empowered choices. And I just honestly, sometimes I want to just punch people. What's wrong with you? You're not a sheep. You're not a drone. Think for yourself. Make good choices. Be a good adult. Be a good human. Parent up.
Yeah, that's quite angry about that. No, it's a real hilarious one. My bosses will say, "Oh my God, I saw the strangest thing the other day. I had a child in the room, and the parent parented, and then like you say, like abdicating things. The amount of people that get to the end of things that say, oh, "Do you have any questions?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, how much time should they spend on the computer? Is it damaging to the eyes?" And I say, "Well, no, it's not damaging to the eyes. It's like reading a book. It's that focused plane." There is some thought that, hey, if you're on it at night time, and I saw you got some blue blockers for your kids the other day. You know, if you're on it at night time, it does trick your brain that it's day. Yeah, there they go. That it's daytime, and even though you're in bed and asleep, your brain is delayed in which, you know, and you'll be getting that data out of your Oura ring. It delays that time when you're in deep sleep and getting that REM sleep. And so if you're, you know, and if you want to read about this, read Matthew Walker's While We Sleep. If you're having to get up to go to school at, you know, 6 o'clock, that period of time that you've had that regenerative and organising sleep is less, and therefore it follows on into all types of things like how well you process carbohydrate, how well you have cortisol, how hungry you are, how, you know, organized your brain is and cleaned up your brain is. And, you know, he sort of says there's a direct link with lack of sleep and Alzheimer's, and being a young father and obviously not sleeping quite so well at the moment, yes, that sort of things really play on you, and, you know, oh god, I'm killing myself. But then at the same time, I find that sort of, especially around the insulin resistance stuff, and the family history of type 2 diabetes, I sort of think, right, I know that if I'm wanting to reach for that biscuit or that chocolate or whatever today, that's my physiology. And actually again, you're not a sheep, you do have control, make good choices, you know, eat the right thing, drink lots of water, and hey, tonight might be better.
Yeah, I mean, there's an enormous amount of education that we're lacking, even from school kid age. How to be human. I mean, what's fascinating is we teach calculus, we teach, you know, physics, we teach sociology or whatever, but we don't actually give our kids an ability to understand what it is to be human that is age appropriate. And then even at university, we have the opportunity to actually see how do you take high performance sport and implement that into education and academia and in your professional life. And so there's this, I feel like there's such a big missing piece to our puzzle around education of, you know, even a biohacking, or not even like deep biohacking, but just understand the relationship between nutrition and mental state, you know, just basic things. And, you know, the day that, when I'm probably very old, the day that we start actually having, you know, human psychology, human physiology, human nutrition, basically human guidebook type classes at primary school, you know, to start with human biology. We do human biology. The day that starts happening from a more comprehensive perspective, I think, is a win for humankind, to be frank, because until we better understand ourselves, our, you know, how we function, how we're hard coded to think sometimes, and how we're, you know, we've evolved to have certain very basic triggers that are triggered every day and not in a good way, we won't figure out kindness and all the other parts that we lack.
Yeah, and you know, with this, going back to that, with this animal that's still got this brain that wants to, you know, let loose our sympathetic nervous system at any chance because we need to survive.
Absolutely.
And you know, you get a text message or an email and it's fired up, you know, and that's where, going back to those religion and politics things, the amount of schools that are trying to implement mindfulness and getting this massive kickback because it's a threat to so and so's religion. You know, well, hang on a minute. You know, it might be what you do actually, and that's one of the pillars of you know, all these religions actually come from great places of what you consume mentally, how you think about your feelings, and take those moments to yourself to look at how you're thinking and you know, what you're doing and what you're putting into your body, and then how you're treating others. You know, like that's exactly what mindfulness is. And so you know, it's a tough one, and then that just follows out into the rest of the world, like being more considerate of your actions and being more considerate of what you're trying to do, and then, you know,
being more accepting of others.
And being that mirror, and like you say, going back to technology, the parents that want to stop their kids from using it or think that it's too much, and then they're sitting in the room texting away the whole time, and I think, well, there's your mirror.
And I mean, to be fair, we are this is new for us,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
This is a new chapter. And we're trying to essentially change millennia of evolution in a world that is coming at us so fast.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it requires more of us to wake up, more of us to say, actually, I have the power to make good choices. And I'm hoping that as we move forward, there will be less misinformation, so people can make informed decisions, and the same less misinformation into our educational system, so more people at a younger age can drive better, smarter, more well-informed decisions for their lives and the next generation.
Yeah, you're saying about that acceptance thing. That's, I think, one of the highlighting and illuminating things of being a parent for the first time is you go, holy shit, I've got no idea, and this is my only time doing this. And then you sort of think of those childhood moments where you got angry or disappointed or upset at your parents, and then you all of a sudden just got this big empathy for your parents' split second decisions based on, and you see it in yourself and some of the things that you do. You're like, oh shit, that's like my parents.
Well, while I duress too, there's lots to be said about when you're sleep deprived and vastly suboptimal with how you're functioning. Add in this little human that is vastly irrational and unpredictable, except for things like poop, although that's pretty unpredictable at times because I had plenty of explosive popcorn poops. That was gross. Just thinking back to those days. We've got to, again, it's just being kind to selves, kind to others, considering the context. And I mean, that saying that, take a walk in their shoes and you'll get a completely different perspective. And I think that is absolutely relevant here. And so there's an element of, being forgiving and having kindness, but equally there's element of just owning this journey, asking for forgiveness if you need it, learning, being better, trying to make better decisions, and ultimately respecting other people's opinions and their own journeys.
With that sort of disruption thing, which is where I sort of started at with my industry, when it comes to that sort of educational spectrum for more access younger, a bigger truth younger, so one of the things that you're sort of starting to see with Google is them trying to channel the right data, and it almost sort of coming from authority. And, as you said, it's not simple. That's where things start to get messy because there's a diverse opinion on things. And like you said, we need to teach people physiology and nutrition. Well, we sort of know that processing is bad. Sugar, maybe in some aspect, you don't want to say bad, but might not be optimal. But then at the same time, it's this massive amount of energy, and it means that we don't have a starvation problem anymore. We have a excessive energy problem anymore. But when you see the likes of Google channeling the call of current authority, and therefore an alternative perspective or a considered perspective gets pushed to the side, what's the sort of conversation about, well, if we need to get the data and the information and the truth out to people, how do we know what's the truth, and whose role is it to step into that algorithm, I guess, the way that it's presented to us? Because then
that's a good question.
Yeah,
because the vast majority of worldwide data is owned by like the big 5 or 6, at least around what we're told. There's a challenge there, and there always will be, assuming that there is an imbalance of power, and there is an imbalance of power. And algorithms are being used to service an ultimate commercial outcome. So of course, when there's money involved, there's always elements of mistrust around, what is it leading me? What path is it leading me down? How is this servicing me versus the shareholders' bank accounts? The interesting part is I'd like to see more fact checking So when you go to a website, or if you do a search, one day there will be more of a pseudo-neutral, at least competitive party that can provide, fact check kind of algorithms that, in the 0.0004 seconds or whatever it is to do a search, it does a complete tunnel of all the information and basically collates, how accurate this information is, or how often it's been shared, or I don't know, there has to be something like that, very similar to what we saw around the political primaries, I think, a number of years ago around fact checking, which I think there is value. But again, is the fact check right? But it's also about being a savvy consumer. So for me, whenever I see, again, this is part of my code, if I see some sensationalist title on the news about something, I will not click that. Like if it's a part of a clickbait or somewhere where, it's trying to pull my gaze, I won't click that, but I will Google the same concept and click another organization that I know is generally trying to do the right thing. So I won't feed the monster. But again, it takes courage and choice to make different decisions. But again, I don't know the answer. And until one organization stops owning the internet as much as they do, we'll see the same problem around mistrust and general lack of accountability of false information.
And I guess when you talk about, US primaries or, the UK Brexit or whatever, and even to some extent in New Zealand, which is quite sort of middle of the road on most things, when you get more sort of polar politics, you see two sets of opinions or two sets of lenses, and like you say, that sort of clickbait title, it's easy to read through it and go, oh my god, wow, but and I guess that's sort of the skeptic in me or the science in me that sort of will often, even for things in my job which I see working or hear about good things, I will often look up debunked or what's the word, like opinions against or whatever, and see, and we're lucky in science because there's the process of peer review. So when you look for that article, you see where it's published, and like you say, the commercial interest, is this just the company itself's website, or have they done the due diligence, done the process and had it looked at and had it critiqued and things like that. And that's where you've got to be careful. Don't read comments. Don't read. Do read them, but consider them that this is a narrative, and you've got to take most things that you see on the internet with a grain of salt. That's one of Tim Ferriss's favourite lines when he's interviewing someone. He said, take everything with a grain of salt, but don't believe everything on the internet, and feel free to fact check what I'm saying when he's interviewing that person.
Yeah, and it's tough. We are in the world of information, and it's so hard to understand what is accurate, what is partly accurate, and what is completely false. And I'm sure back in the day, you mentioned your peer-reviewed journals, and there's a reason why the scientific community required such, complex and important peer reviewing process, because what was real and what was not. I can't imagine that with the freedom of information and freedom of speech that we'll ever get to that place on the internet. And certainly because once on the internet, it stays on the internet and anybody can refer it even if it's wrong. So technically something could be referenced and fact checked, but it might be from wrong information to begin with. So there's going to be some type of swing, I'm sure. It's just trying to find that like little happy place that doesn't stifle, again, the freedom of speech, the value of opinion versus, fact. And then where do facts come from? And is there going to be in the future some type of gold seal where an organization, their job is to certify certain statements, and they are held by a similar peer review process like Harvard Law or New England Medical Journal or whatever, where a body functions to verify specific facts. and you could submit to get them to verify and to find the original source and to validate and to poke holes. So maybe one day there will be a certification star that says we are two out of 5 stars. I'm confident that this is based on factual information or something like that.
So what's sort of the thought process in creating programs or applications or something? What are you sort of running through in terms of checking if it works or if it's right? Is it, you turn things off and on and they work again. What's the sort of framework that somebody who doesn't work in tech or hasn't, just uses stuff, what's the sort of mindset that goes into behind the scenes of creating something big like a automation or something like that? Is it to try and think of, you were saying about rights and wrongs and those dials and stuff. Where do you go when you're creating something? It's like an art and with a science application.
Yeah.
Like, what do you think you could explain or sum up the mindset of a tech developer?
Well, if I play that back to you, are you asking how would someone navigate this kind of world in a responsible way to create apps or things that they might be proud of? Is that what you're asking?
I guess that would be what, this would partly be your opinion, but what would be the ideal, like you just said, way to navigate it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I would do is read a book. I mean, so there's a great book, and I don't have it with me right now, but it's basically, it's got a funny title like, do this before you develop an app.
Right, yeah.
And he goes into, a really comprehensive but simple way to do this by design. And I think that's the critical part is enter into any type of technology development with a design in mind and a very clear intent, so which is not dissimilar to any type of goal that you want to create. It's, it's my intent to craft an app that makes it delightful to purchase groceries in a way that does not sacrifice the privacy or confidentiality of the person's data. I mean, whatever it might be, right? It's just, that's a 2-sentence statement that is very clearly what I'm trying to do. And then there's a whole bunch of things, and I guess I can send you the book name, but it's quite comprehensive, that goes through all of the pitfalls and the really constructive way to design something, that is well done and thought through, that anybody can read and feel like, oh yeah, I think I can learn those lessons from obviously millions of people that have screwed up before and do this really diligently. And it even has tips on how to hire the right people, and how do you navigate this part-time, or in a way that perhaps you get someone from India or Vietnam to be able to help you from a development perspective, because developers are quite expensive in sort of the America and New Zealand and Australia sort of zones. So happy to provide the link. I think it's a great book. And for just starting out that's interested in doing something of value, hopefully in an ethical or at least a mindful way by design, that might be helpful for them.
Yeah, of that sort of ethics of it, how do you see the worth of, say, those people that have done their degrees in Indonesia or India or Philippines or those, like China even, that are at a lower price point but are doing a fantastic job? Obviously that lower price point is in part to do with their cost of living where they are, but also you also would like to think about, well, their quality of living could be vastly, tenfold improved by a market rate. And I guess that speaks to that capitalist sort of liberalist society sort of thing as well. But where do you feel the ethics of outsourcing with something like this might stand, and the responsibility, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. I see your point. I know what the ethical conundrum is. And then you can, again, post hoc the crap out of it, because, again, across those 6 moral foundations, are you providing business where they otherwise wouldn't? Right? Because perhaps you wouldn't have chosen to go to Malaysia and select someone from this area to do the work. So theoretically, instead of them working in substandard conditions, they get to work from a home that may not be as bad, earning a fair wage that will actually help them get ahead. And eventually they'll start charging more because they're worth more, and perhaps that'll help get them out of their position. So I can't certainly attest to how right it is to offer the rates that they will accept. I think it would be lovely to see higher rates and certainly increasing rates as their skill set increases, because at the end of the day, I want people to be rewarded for good work, and equally have an opportunity to escape perhaps substandard or unhealthy conditions that they were born into. So I'd like to think that over time, and it will happen, that the rates will increase, that they will demand and drive higher rates, and it will kind of equalize a bit. But it is a problem, and it could be manipulated or used, absolutely. And is it being done so right now? Absolutely. It's people are being used for those reasons. But again, I hope that it's slowly edging people towards a slightly better standard of living, and then eventually again increasing their skills, so it'll end up working out in the end. I actually don't know how it's any worse than sweatshops, actually. Probably better.
And I guess that sort of speaks to the sort of social enterprise realm, and we both know Thomas Nabbs that's doing great work, channeling money around in the Waikato. But something that I watched a number of years ago, and I can't even remember the name of the documentary, but it's on Netflix, surprisingly enough. And it's about these guys that go to maybe Ecuador or something in South America, and they live on $1 a day. And the whole purpose of it was these small loans that I think are like $100 US or something like that go into these communities, and they use it to basically build one thing, like whether it's plant a garden and certain crop, or build a processing plant, which again, that you'd look at the health and safety and the regulations and all those sort of certifications that we need in the Western world, and you think, oh hell, they're getting away with it, sort of thing. But it means that, like you say, it pushes the needle, and then it employs the community, and then it lifts up the whole community. And like I say, it's like $100 US.
I know.
People in the US would be lucky to spend that, in a day or a couple of days. Yet this is creates a change of life, and it is an interesting sort of that social enterprise thing. Well, instead of directing my business into my backyard, which, hey, in New Zealand we could possibly get an argument for doing that too, but I'm creating a world impact. It's good for my business, it's good for them. It goes back to that justifying it a little bit, but yeah, it's a fascinating thing when you talk about developed versus developing and versus third world.
I mean, the whole social enterprise, social responsibility is such an important part, and I love the work that that a lot of the water companies, Good Water, things like that, where water is such an important part of any kind of developing country's success. So clean water, right? But that sort of leads into where are we going with social responsibility and social business. And I'd like to think that as more consumers, and complete as an aside, as more consumers choose to purchase products from companies that do have a philanthropic or a social enterprise sort of spin to their company, will drive more money to those organizations. But not only that, but have more money available to pay for great leaders leading those organizations. Because when you think about a Harvard graduate or a Stanford graduate, or whatever, right? If they've got the opportunity to earn $1 million in 5 years working in corporate, versus maybe, if you're lucky, 160 in 5 years in social enterprise, if you're lucky, they're probably going to choose the former. Just, it's a no-brainer, right? But once more consumers again start to drive money towards these social enterprises, I'm hoping that over the next 10 years, you're going to see more social enterprises having enough money to pay for these really amazing leaders, but that will also require citizens and average Joes to understand that these people deserve that money comparatively to their corporate counterparts. But what will probably happen is there'll be some type of whistleblower that says, this company, this organization is digging wells and spending this amount of money on the people, actually earns 3 times more money as a salary. And then that's going to go up in arms. So again, it's like, all right, let's try to be smart here. Let's try to understand the landscape. Let's try to understand in the world that we work in, and equally the chessboard. Like, this is just a chessboard, right? It's a chessboard that has very specific rules. It's usually around money. Capitalism is a huge driver for most decisions, and understanding where all the pieces play. And until we kind of understand that there is this inherent chess-like nature to the world and how it works, and how we decide what our decisions, how that influences or works with or against, we're just gonna be pointing fingers and laying blame and calling people, bad guys and us victims or whatever. It's just like, it's a chessboard. We're humans. We're flawed. This is the world. Try to make the best of it. Try to make it work for you. Navigate as best you can and make good choices.
Yeah. This podcast is probably going to have some show notes because I need to look up a TED Talk. It's about that very topic, about talking about a marketing director in a company, its worth, and then a marketing director for philanthropy or social enterprise. And imagine if we could pay that marketing director to create the impact for a social enterprise, how much greater scale of income the social enterprise could have.
Absolutely.
And I need to find that. And when you were talking about good water, I don't know if you watch my YouTube, I was a little bit I was checking my phone, and a book that is really good to get an idea around the pitfalls, the challenges of trying to start a social enterprise is Daniel Flynn's book. And going back to Seed and Thomas Nabbs, they managed to get Daniel Flynn to speak on Thank You, and do a drive to, again, through social network, get Thank You into New Zealand. It's just tough work and scale. Especially when you're dealing with like a supermarket, the scale of product, the scale of pricing and price points and stuff like that. It's just never-ending challenges.
Well, the interesting part is I don't know about you, but I would be willing to let go a not insignificant part of my salary if I knew 100% that my money was impacting someone in a way that was worthwhile. The problem I have is around trust. Right? And for a very long time, I had a lovely girl called, her Anglicized name was Jean from Rwanda. That I was paying for about 10 years food, through World Vision. And again, I just took a risk that these guys are doing what they're supposed to do. And then they sent me updates, and I got letters from her, which is wonderful. But again, I would give more if I knew it was making more of an impact. And case in point, right? I was walking down Grey Street, and this man asked me for money, and I said, can you tell me what it's for? And he says, I've got a baby at home that needs diapers. And I said, I'm not going to give you money now, but if you give me your address, I will send 2 boxes of diapers to your home tomorrow. Like, I will spend money on you if it's actually making a difference. And he said, oh, no, it's fine. And so, there's this element of how much good is it creating? And is there enough accountability or trust or mechanisms to make people believe that their money is making a difference? I don't know. That's where blockchain comes in. I don't know.
Blockchain, yeah. Well,
that's not the magic wand either. So I say that very carefully because that's inherent of problems.
Yeah, and you just needed to watch the speculation of Bitcoin
Oh,
like say, depends where the direction's going.
yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if you can hear the siren here. We've got a volunteer fire department.
Yeah,
Can you hear it?
we've got one in Cambridge. It's Billy's favourite thing. She's like, sorry, it's okay.
We have visitors from overseas and they think it's some type of bomb threat. They're like, what do we do? We're going to go under a table? Oh,
Take it down to the fire station. They can do it with a hand.
Yeah.
No, awesome. So as you said, this weekend you've been setting goals, and how often do you do that? What sort of, where do you go to create this goal chart, and what do you feel the value is in writing it down? Because I found a list that Alex and I wrote in Australia, and I looked at it and I was like, man, all of these things are ticked off. It just enters your subconscious, and things happen. It's weird.
Yeah. It is weird. It is weird. There's a lot of power in writing stuff down and then revisiting it. And I try to revisit. So I've got, I've got my overarching goals.
Nice. Yeah.
And then it's just a matter of breaking them down into more tangible outcomes. I try to look at them every day. So as a part of my routine, every day I try to do my 5-minute journal, which is about gratitude. I try to do meditation, although that is often in my 5-minute journal as what I missed is meditation. And then reviewing my list, exercise obviously, and then sort of start my day. But for me, it's probably every 3 to 6 months I revisit and sort of assess, is that still what I want in my life? Is that still a part of my essential intent? And is that serving me? But outside of that, I will try to look at it every day just to kind of touch base and figure out if I'm going in the right direction. And then I often use that as a part of Vishen Lakhiani's meditation that he has, which I think is like a 6-phase meditation, which looks at visualization of what your life will look like once some of these things are complete, and what your perfect day looks like, and then basically how you're being supported and we remain accountable to like your higher energy purpose. So it's not talking about religion per se, it's more about spirituality. How do you feel like the universe is putting things in the place and locking things to help serve your higher purpose? So I try to do that. Not always perfect, and there are some weeks I'm not in the groove, and I find myself kind of craving that structure, and then I'll get back into it.
Yeah, that energy thing is sort of fascinating, like sapping or high energy states, flow states. It's all very airy-fairy, but when you actually live it, observe it, and feel it, then you go, well, there's something to it. But how
that's
you
the exciting part is understanding there's a whole area of science that we have not even touched the surface of, and I'm a big believer that we will actually uncover some of these interesting pieces of the puzzle. And again, getting closer to the ones and zeros of science makes you realize there's way more in between the notes. And that's getting me almost closer to spirituality and what it means to be human than I ever have because of those unknowns.
Yeah, you said about, when I was talking about the fungus, you eat the wrong thing and all of a sudden you're microdosing. That might be something that we get out of this psychedelic exploration that's going on in the States. And, especially if it's in places like St. Johns Hopkins and you've got Harvard or Boston nearby, and they're trying to figure out the sort of interlink and neural link, back to Elon Musk's neural link of technology. These and there's sort of some thought that the mycelium is basically the Earth's neural link. So maybe we might see some parallels coming through of these two independently different research fields, and all of a sudden we do get that birthing of augmented artificial reality or intelligence, whatever you want to call it.
But it reminds me of the new Star Trek show called Orville. I love that show so much. But a lot of these things that we're seeing are being emulated in the shows that we watch. And it's amazing what's actually becoming real from what people have been thinking up on this content. It's remarkable. We're alive in a really special time.
Yeah, on there, I think that's sort of speaks to the same thing as writing stuff down. Like there's been these movies and Jetsons or Matrix or whatever, and people say, "Oh, the Matrix is coming real" or whatever, and you think, well, maybe it's also a little bit of that was our creative thought, and it's just sort of entered our subconscious, and that's the direction we're heading.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe so. Who knows?
Well, Rachel, this has been awesome, and I'm sure we could yarn forever. Where do people sort of where should they look when it comes to the technological automation, artificial stuff, and where can people sort of track you and your sort of part in that sphere within New Zealand and obviously around the world as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. My handle is Rachel Kelly NZ. There's a lot of great content around AI and automation, all that kind of stuff on medium.com. So a lot of great dialogue going on there, which for the most part I think is quite insightful. And oftentimes I keep a lookout for, I have Google alerts that alert me for certain topics that I stay abreast of some of the new things coming out of AI and automation. My area that I'm super excited for is, autonomous moral agents. So how are we creating morality within our AI, or at least doing that in a way that is autonomous? That is the part that I'm sort of moving towards, and that's just impossible. It feels impossible right now. And then, I used to have a Facebook page that was public, but I pulled that down. But otherwise, LinkedIn and Twitter is where to find me.
Okay. And so, speaking to that sphere that you're involved with, what would be something that you'd leave people with to contemplate, to think about, or some sort of quote that you think aligns with that? What would you leave us with, Rachel?
Oh. Well, to be fair, I'm going to leave you with the dog story.
Yeah, awesome.
Again, if there's any people watching this that want to actually bring it up with their kids, I think it's a really interesting thought experiment, and the kids actually seem to really kind of find it interesting. So there is a family, and they have a family dog. The family dog gets hit by a car outside their house, and they're all outside looking at this dog that died on impact, essentially. And they bring the dog inside, and as a family, they think, well, what do we do with the dog? Do we bury him? Do we burn him? Do we put him in the trash? How do we do this? And one of the family members said, well, in some countries, dog is considered a delicacy. So they all kind of think about it, and they talk it through, and they actually say, they all agree. All right. So they cook the dog up and have a lovely family feast of the dog. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, you got to post hoc that one. You brought up one of the arguments for that. Delicacy. Where does dog sit in our hierarchy? Oh man, that's a good conversation starter.
It is a bit of alarmist for some kids. Some kids might be quite upset about it, but I think at the end of the day, it brings up a really good point, because in some countries and cultures, there is a dog meat trade. That doesn't mean it's right, especially how they treat the dogs, and it's horrific. But again, if the dog was already dead and you want to be able to honor the dog and having part of him become part of you, it's actually quite beautiful. So depending on sort of how you look at it, everybody agreed. There was no one that was ostracized by having a belief. Everyone agreed to it. They did it in their own home, in their own safety of their family unit. Nobody was killed as a process of them making that decision. The dog was already dead. It's a great efficiency of resources, because then they didn't have to kill a cow for that meal. Instead, they killed something, or that they used something that was already dead and healthy. And so there's a whole bunch of gambits of conversation that you can have around kids. Is what is right or wrong? How do you decide that? What if somebody has something that believes in a different course of events than your neighbor next door? Does that make them bad people? And then it comes up to what makes a bad person. All right. So anyway, suffice it to say, it brings up interesting conversations, and it can be spun towards technology, right? And I think if you can get that conversation happening around the dining room table with lots of different ages. I think it's a good start.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to this. I'll let you
Yeah,
get
you're
on with the
welcome.
rest of your Sunday. And I think anybody listening to this can feel rest assured that, at least in New Zealand, we've got somebody that's considering those aspects of technology and where it's going. And we should still, get involved and be aware of what's happening. But there's someone that's batting on the side of humanity and humanism and morals. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Rachel. And this was a fantastic chat. I've learned a lot, considered a lot, and probably changed some thoughts about things. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was lovely having a chat with you. It's been too long, but thank you for having me on here.
Cheers. I'm going to hit stop. Thank you.